Today I'm going to show you how to turn a skirt like this into a super adorable pair of whimsical bloomers. Earlier this week, I took this white $2 skirt that I had thrifted and turned it into this pair of bloomers right here. You all were so excited and thank you for the amazing feedback and encouragement, but one common question kept coming up, and that was, can you please show us how? How did you make these? So I thought I would just show you in today's video how you can turn a skirt into a pair of whimsical bloomers. Okay, as for supplies, you may already have what you need in your closet. So number one, you need the skirt that you want to turn into the bloomers. This skirt needs to have enough body to fit comfortably over your hips as well as your waist. So you do want it to be a few sizes too big. That just makes it have that movement. But if you do have one that fits a little bit snugger, you can still make it happen. The pair that I started with this week, the sample that I made on a whim, this one actually was a little tight for me in the waist. So what I ended up doing is cutting the top layer or the top tier off of the skirt, and that gave us a little bit more body. But because of that, I had to recreate a waistband and add a little bit additional elastic here. So you can totally do it. You just may have to alter your skirt a little bit, but you definitely want to make sure that it can slide on very easily with room. And the reason for that is we are going to be cutting out the U shape. When you look at a pair of pants, shorts, anything that has that crotch area, you're going to have a U. So for this pattern, guess what? You don't have to get super technical. You can spend time mapping out exact measurements. You can use a pattern, but you also don't need to go through all of that. And that's the technique I'm going to show you today. We're just gonna wing it. Now, what you will need that's gonna make your life easier is a pair of loose fitting pants, loose shorts, lounge pants, not tight. You don't want anything tight, but something that you just like the way that it fits around your waist and your crotch area. So for me, I have this pair of linen pants that I made, and I like the way they fit. They're just loose enough. The waistband is the exact size I'm looking for. And so you just want one of these because you're gonna use it as reference. So you'll see this is half of the U. Now, like I said, we're not going to get super technical. Typically, when you're cutting out, a pant, you're going to have it higher on one side. You're going to do angles. You're going to figure out math. Again, we're not doing that. We're going to make this a simple, super simple pant, and we're just going to repeat this pattern on both sides. You can still adjust and alter as necessary just to make sure you have enough space, but having something like this is a really good reference point. If you can salvage the waistband, that's pretty much all you're going to need. But you can also, as I mentioned with the first pair, make your own waistband, add additional elastic. You could, in my case, I added it as an elastic drawstring instead of just an elasticated waistband, which I may do with this as well. I think it does give it a little whimsical feel because now you have this drawstring. Also, you may want to add additional notions to your item depending on how far you want to take it. So I don't have a lot of matching notions to go on top of this skirt, but I do have some off-white colored lace that I may add to the bottom of each leg just to give it a little bit more flounce, be a little bit more dramatic. But again, this is more optional, but it could be super fun. So that's really it, and let's dive right in. First thing we need to do is remove the waistband. So depending on your garment, you may need to cut this portion off. So if this is really snug on your hips and you want to cut this off so that it fits a little bit easier, you could just cut it all the way. You could also, if you want to salvage this, which again, I really try to recommend trying to salvage as much of your fabric as possible. Again, we don't want to create more waste. We're upcycling so that we can turn something into an item that will last a lot longer as opposed to end up in the landfill. So I'm actually going to seam pick this off because I do want to use this as well. Now, I may not add elastic back into this. I may just use this as a casing and then add the stretchy drawstring, because I do like that look to this. But I'm going to take this off painstakingly with my seam ripper and try to salvage this piece. So with this piece, I actually ended up with 3 different pieces, and I was able to salvage the waistband. So here's our waistband. I'm going to press that out, and so we'll be able to reuse this. This garment also had a lining. Now, this lining is really soft. I think it is just like a light cotton. And I will certainly be able to use this for another project, but it didn't need to be lined. So we are going to save this beautiful cottony fabric for another project. Now I do need to clean up around the edges so that I can take all of these threads off. It's so much easier when you clean these threads now before you start to sew. We're not quite there yet, but definitely important that we do that. Also, this is where you want to decide the length. Because I'm not going to take any length off, I'm going to leave it exactly how it is. They're going to be more of like the longer pant style bloomer. And then we'll save this elastic, because this elastic also, I thought it was crunchy, but I think it was just the fabric that was over it. So there's a lot of life left in this. We're going to save this and we can reuse this again for another project. So we'll put that in our reuse pile. So now that we have this side squared off, the next step is just to cut it directly down the center. And again, you can measure this out, you can get as technical as you want, but I am just gonna eyeball it because these are gonna be loose and flowy. It's gonna be fine if they're slightly off. Slightly, not significantly. We want this to be even. This pair itself, so I do have this turned inside out just so that it lays a little bit flatter. And I do have a seam. So there's a seam on the side, and then over here, there's a seam for portion of the tiers, but not really. So I think that we have this laid out well. Then again, we want to cut this right down the center. So what I will do is I'm just going to fold it in half to get dead center here. And then what I typically do is take it over to the ironing board and press this in place. It just makes it easier and gives me a nice defined cut line. But you could also just finger press it or hand press it in here. The heat will create a crease. As long as you have everything totally aligned here, you should get a crease when you open it back up. And then I can see my crease going straight up the center. So again, I'm not going to get too fancy with these. And so I have my little crease line that I can see here going straight up. And then that's how we're just going to cut right into it. So the next step is going to be to cut out the crotch area. So what we're going to do first is we are going to make sure, okay, that everything is lined up on your pieces. So we have this piece and we have this piece. This is the open edge. This is the open edge. So we are going to take this and we're going to place it on top of here. Again, we just want to make sure that everything is even. Okay, that looks great. Then what I'm probably going to do is come in with some clips or some pins just to keep everything aligned. So let's go ahead and pin everything in place just so it doesn't shift when we cut out our U shape. So now we have both of our pieces. These are the folded edges. These are the raw edges. We have them pinned in place. We don't want any movement. We want everything to stay the same. You also, if you wanted to, you could do one side and then use that as a template, but this is honestly the easiest way to do this. So now this is where you're going to grab your item. And since we are going to have a waistband, I'm going to leave that overlapping. We can adjust that as necessary. So essentially this is the U shape that these pants have, but I think I'm actually going to cut this a little bit deeper. And I know I told you you wouldn't need math, but you do want to ensure that you have enough length on the top to fit your waist. Okay, so before you cut, don't cut all the way over here because that's going to leave you very little fabric to be at the top of your waistband. So in this case, you know, this total piece, and this is a little bit stretchy fabric, so I'm just going to tug it a little bit just so I can get a true sense. So in this case, it's about 13 inches across one side. So that's 26 inches for the left side and then 26 inches for the right side. For me, that is going to fit over my hips. I think my hips are 37 inches and 26 and 26 is at least 40, 52, math. So simplest terms, you just want to make sure that you aren't cutting too far over here so that it will still fit your waist. This is why you want to have extra fabric. And again, I'm just using this as a template. Okay, so here is my little U. So it's going to go from here down and here around. So then I'm just gonna go in, and this blade is very dull, but we're trying to get even cuts all the way down. So now we're gonna remove our pins because we already have our cut. Okay, so these are our cuts, and so we're going to start assembling, and we are going to lay these out flat. So this is how it should look. You have the U's on both sides, and then with the other piece, same thing, and we're gonna put right sides together. So we're just going to put these together and pin them in place. So now that we have right sides together and we have both sides pinned in place, we're going to baste our crotch front and back together so that we can try them on and make sure that they fit. And by basting stitches, what I mean by that, kind of temporary stitches. They are the longest stitch that you have. You do not back stitch at the beginning or end. You just want them to be a holder to hold things in place for sizing and fitting. And then we'll just seam pick those out once we put our final stitches in. At this point, you're ready to try them on. So I stitched, like I said, just with basting stitches, just the front and back, and then a couple inches on both sides of the legs, just so I can ensure that when I move, right, or when I squat, everything is going to feel comfortable and work as you want it to. Now, I will say these are a little shorter than what I would typically wear, but that is because we have not re-added the waistband. So we still will need to do that. But before we get to that step, once you're comfortable with the fit of your item, you're going to go back in and do your permanent stitches, reinforcing at the beginning and end as you normally would, and then finishing your seams however is comfortable for you. Again, I'm going to do French seams. Essentially, it's just going to encase the seams inside of itself, so then that way they don't come unraveled, but you can use whatever method works best for you. Now, I just realized that a lot of you have asked me about French seams. So I feel like this is a good time to show you that technique. So before I do my finishing stitches, I do need to seam pick the leg. So we're gonna start just by removing that. Again, we know that those fit, we just want those out of here. Okay, so let's talk about French seams. So first thing we need to do is put our wrong sides together, which I know can always seem a little odd when we're sewing a seam, but that is the first step with our little French seams here. Now we have our wrong sides together. We have our crotch seams pinned. And so we're gonna go through and do our seam allowance here. And I'm gonna do about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So for me, that's gonna work here. And then I'm going to do another 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to encase the seams. So that's gonna give us a total of a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So essentially you're just halving the seam allowance for step 1 and step 2. So step 1, we're going to stitch our permanent stitches here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, again, reinforcing at the beginning and the end of the stitches. We'll do that on both pieces, and then I'll show you what the next step is. Okay, so I have stitched our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now we need to do a couple of things. Number 1, we need to trim down the seam allowance as well as clip, and then we're going to press it to the other side. So we'll start and just making sure you're not cutting into the other fabric. So we're trimming this down just to make sure that we don't have any loose threads sticking out. Also, it makes it a little bit easier to hide within that additional 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then also, because we have this turn right here, we do want to clip, but again, be careful. You don't want to cut the stitches, but this will help it so that it expands a little bit. So you're just clipping into the curve. There we go. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. So once you have that done, now we're going to turn this wrong side out. Okay, and we are going to take our iron and we are going to press this all the way down. We're going to do this on both sides. And then what we're going to do is take this back to our sewing machine. Once we get this flat, we're going to go back and do that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, okay? And what that's going to do is it's going to take this raw edge right here and it's going to stitch it and hide it. Just to show you, to demonstrate what I just told you. So we're pressed all the way down, but this is the wrong side. And then we have our right side there. And again, I'm just using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance with my permanent stitches. Still back stitching at the beginning and end of each stitch. Okay, so here is how the inside looks of this first crotch seam. So everything is nice and hidden. And then the outside also looks nice and clean. So that is how you do a very simple French seam. Now, depending on your fabric thickness, you may also want to top stitch that seam in place. You can certainly do that. If you have a lot of fabric here and it's flapping around, you may decide that it's more comfortable to stitch it down. Again, whatever, this is totally up to you. I think for me, this fabric is really lightweight and I don't think I need to stitch it down. And then we'll use the same concept for our legs. Now we're ready to reattach our waistband. So we have our legs all stitched together. Seams look great. Everything's aligned. And now we just need to, again, reattach this, or you can create a new waistband, whichever works best for you. Also, another option for you is you could, if this would have been something to plan for at the beginning, but if you had enough fabric, you could just fold it over and create a casing as well. So there's so many options here. So what I did was I took the existing waistband and I pressed it. Okay, because it was super wrinkly because I had that old elastic in there. So now what you might find is that if you trimmed any of the top off, which I did, right? I only trimmed a little bit off, but because I did that, I have a feeling that this waistband is going to be a little bit too big. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit. So typically what I would do is I would measure out the waistband or measure out the circumference of the waist, and then I would adjust the waistband by stitching it and cutting it and then attaching it. But we're going to save a little time here. So this, we already have a seam right here. And then what I'm going to do is I have it just pinned in place. I am going to stitch all the way around just with my typical seam allowance until I get back to about here. And then I'll probably find that I have a good portion, maybe I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 inches of extra fabric that won't fit in here. And then that's where I'm actually going to mark stitch these two pieces of the waistband back together to get the right size, and then continue my stitches across. It's just, again, a lazy way to do this, but I think that it is appropriate for this quick project. So let's talk about different types of waistbands you can use. For the white one that I made, I used the lining to create a new waistband, and then I just used this elastic drawstring material. It's just hidden on the inside, so you don't actually even see any of the tie. But what you could also do is you could create some buttonholes on the front if you wanted it to be a visible tie, and pull those through. You could also go back to if your garment had, or if your skirt had elastic, you could just put the elastic back in if you want to have an elastic one as well. For me, I really like how this turned out. I like that it's still stretchy, it has a tie on it so it's adjustable, and it is simple. So we're gonna use that same technique on this pair here. So the one thing you will want to decide is which is your front and back of your garment. This is going to be the front. That means is I am going to be finishing these edges all the way around before, so I'm going to double fold them. I'll do a rolled hem. And I'm going to finish it all the way around before I stitch it down. But the reason I'm doing that is just so that that seam doesn't unroll, because I am going to have that drawstring, again, just sitting out of this channel. We're not going to stitch it in place, just so that we still have that elastic flexibility. And then I'll stitch from here all the way around back to here, but I'll leave this space open. And this is how we are going to thread our elastic back into our casing. So I just finished. this is how I will actually wear these. So I'm pretty impressed, honestly. So they're tall enough. They have that little elastic waistband. I did add an additional row of lace to the very bottom. I would wear them with this oversized linen top like this. This is how comfortable, look how much movement they have. And then again, the drawstring makes them super adjustable. So anyway, there are so many ways that you can customize these bloomers. I decided to forego the pockets because of the lightweight fabric, but you could add pockets. You can add additional rows of ruffles. You can make them shorter. There's just so many different possibilities. But if you do make a pair of these, let me know, tag me. I would love to see your creations, and then let me know what you want me to upcycle next. Until next time, everyone, see ya!